Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The Fireman's Doubt. Guy Montag, with his helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, enjoyed the roar of the flames. The books, like pigeons, burst into fire, fluttering their pages desperately. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He reveled in the routine of his work, the comforting predictability of the fire's destruction, yet he couldn't shake off a sense of emptiness that lingered at the edge of his consciousness. It was during one of these moments of introspection that he encountered her. "Is it true," asked Clarice McClellan, "that long ago, firemen used to put out fires and not start them?" Her voice was like a chime in the still night, and her eyes, wide and gleaming, fixed upon Montag with an innocent curiosity. Montag laughed. "That's a strange idea," he said. But as he walked away, her words started a small fire of doubt in his mind. Days passed, and the doubt grew. It followed him as he walked the silent halls of the fire station, and as he lay awake at night, listening to the soft breathing of his wife, Mildred, who was lost in her own world of screens and shallow dreams. Mildred's days were filled with the hum of electronic bees and the trivialities of her family on the screens, a stark contrast to Montag and his own growing introspection. He would often find himself reflecting on past experiences that now seemed to align with his growing doubt. He remembered the woman who had burned with her books, and the strange sense of unease he had felt as he watched her die. He recalled the neighbor's house, where he had witnessed genuine conversations and laughter, and felt a pang of envy towards their warmth and connection. The doubt had taken root, and Montag couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, as Montag stood before a house, flamethrower in hand, he felt the weight of a single book in his pocket. It was a stolen book, taken from the house he had burned down just the night before. He had been drawn to it by a force he couldn't explain, and now it felt like a brick in his pocket, heavy with the power to change his life. As he raised the flamethrower, he felt a strange reluctance. He thought of Clarice's words and the questions they had stirred within him. For the first time, he saw the books not as objects to be destroyed, but as vessels of knowledge and stories waiting to be discovered. He noticed an old woman standing in the shadows, her eyes fixed on the books with a deep longing. In that moment, he realized the true value of what he was about to destroy. With a heavy heart, Montag lowered the flamethrower and walked away from the house, leaving it untouched. He knew he was stepping into dangerous territory, but the doubt had taken root, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Mildred slept peacefully beside him. He whispered to himself, "What if we've been wrong? What if there's more to those books than we've been led to believe?" Little did he know that this stolen book would be the first step towards a journey of rebellion, self-discovery, and a quest for truth in a world where knowledge was feared and controlled. The Hidden Book. Guy Montag stood in the smoldering ruins of what was once a house filled with books. His hands trembled as he reached for the singed cover of Ecclesiastes, a book that had miraculously survived the fire. He glanced around, the heat from the flames still kissing his face. "Montag, what are you doing?" Mildred's voice crackled through his earpiece, her tone laced with confusion and the static of the fire's roar. "I'm saving this one," Montag whispered, more to himself than to her. He carefully tucked the book under his arm, feeling its weight as if it carried the heaviness of 1,000 words longing to be read. "But why?" Mildred asked, her voice a distant echo against the backdrop of the burning house. Montag's eyes darted to the fire truck, where his fellow firemen were busy rolling up hoses, oblivious to the small act of rebellion he was committing. "This one feels different," he said, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. He thought of Clarice, the young girl who had opened his eyes to the beauty of the world, to the questions that books could answer. He remembered her bright eyes and her curious spirit, now silenced by the harsh reality of their society. Clarice would have understood, he muttered, almost hoping she could hear him through the chaos. As Montag made his way back to the fire truck, he felt the book's presence against his side like a burning ember of hope. He climbed aboard, the engine's rumble a stark contrast to the silence of his thoughts. From this moment on, his life would never be the same. At home, Montag wasted no time. He climbed the stairs to the bedroom with a quick glance to ensure Mildred was still engrossed in her family on the parlor walls. He removed the grill of the ventilation shaft and stashed the book inside. The cool metal of the shaft seemed to whisper promises of freedom and a future where thoughts could roam as freely as the air that passed through it. That night, as Montag lay in bed, the weight of his actions pressed upon him. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. In the darkness, Montag's mind raced with the possibilities that lay ahead. He envisioned a world where firemen put out fires instead of starting them, where books were treasured and knowledge was cherished. Treasured and knowledge was cherished. Montag's thoughts drifted to the group of individuals who had taken it upon themselves to become living books, memorizing works of literature to preserve them for a future generation. He imagined joining them, sharing whispered words of wisdom in a world that thirsted for truth. The thought of Beatty's scornful voice explaining the need for sameness for a happiness devoid of depth fueled Montag's resolve. He pictured a society where the firemen's hoses quenched flames rather than fed them, where the flicker of understanding in a child's eyes wasn't extinguished by ignorance. As the night deepened, so did Montag's conviction that the path to enlightenment was one he must tread, regardless of the dangers that lay ahead. Mildred's disconnection. The room was aglow with the flickering light of the television, casting shadows on Mildred's face as she sat, transfixed by the colorful images dancing before her eyes. The seashells hummed in her ears, a constant stream of music and chatter that shielded her from the silence of thought. Montag watched her from the doorway, a book hidden beneath his fireman's jacket, its weight heavy against his chest. "Mildred," he called softly, but she didn't turn, her gaze locked on the screen. He stepped closer, the book pressing into his side. "Mildred, can we talk?" The words seemed to float around her, unheard. Montag reached out, gently removing one of the seashells from her ear. Mildred flinched, her eyes snapping to his face, irritation flickering across her features. "What is it, Montag?" she asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. "You know I don't like to be disturbed during my shows." Montag hesitated, the questions he wanted to ask lingering on his tongue. About Clarice, about the books, about everything that had been changing inside him. But he saw the impatience in Mildred's eyes, the way she fidgeted, eager to return to her escape. "It's nothing," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never mind." He inserted the seashell back into her ear, and Mildred's gaze drifted back toward the television, the colors and sounds swallowing her whole once more. Montag watched her for a moment, feeling the weight of their disconnection like a chasm between them. He turned to leave, the book still hidden beneath his jacket, its presence a secret he kept from the world, and from Mildred. The rest of the evening passed in silence, Montag lost in his thoughts, Mildred absorbed in her shows. They moved around each other like ghosts, their footsteps quiet on the floor. It was as if they were living in separate worlds, their paths crossing only briefly, like strangers in the night. As they lay in bed, the darkness closing in around them, Montag reached out, his hand brushing against Mildred's. She didn't respond, her body stiff, her breathing slow. He felt like he was holding onto a statue, a woman made of stone and ice. Suddenly, a distant siren pierced the silence, followed by the unmistakable roar of a mechanical hound. Montag's heart raced. The sound was a grim reminder of the world outside, a world where firemen hunted down those who dared to read. The book in his jacket felt like a ticking bomb, its words a threat to the fragile peace of their home. As the sounds faded into the night, Montag lay awake, the realization dawning on him that he could no longer ignore the call for the professor's guidance. Montag paced nervously in the dim light of Faber's cluttered living room. Faber, the retired professor, sat across from him, his figure almost blending into the shadows, save for the occasional glint of light reflecting off the myriad of electronic devices that surrounded him. These machines, humming steadily in the background, were Faber's silent allies in a world that shunned knowledge. They were the conduits through which the whispered words of wisdom would flow into the ears of the willing. "Professor, I don't understand," Montag began, his voice a mix of frustration and desperation. "Why do we burn something that feels so alive?" Faber adjusted his glasses, his eyes reflecting a spark of excitement. "Books are not just paper and ink, Montag. They're the distilled essence of human thought, the very soul of our civilization. But how can they change anything if reading them is forbidden?" Montag questioned, his hands trembling slightly as he held the book. "That's the beauty of it." Faber replied, leaning forward, his eyes alight with a fervor that belied his years. "A single book can awaken minds. It's a risk, yes, but one worth taking." Montag nodded, the seed of rebellion planted by Clarice now sprouting into a firm resolve. "I want to read. I want to understand." Faber smiled, a rare sight. "Then let's begin your real education." He reached for a dusty volume on the shelf. "Shakespeare, the Bible, Shaw. These are your new teachers." As Montag listened, the words from the pages seemed to dance around him, igniting a fire far more intense than any he had ever set as a fireman. With each word, Montag felt as if he was peeling back the layers of the world, revealing truths long hidden. "It's as though I've been wandering in a dream," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "And these words, they're the beacon guiding me to wakefulness." Faber nodded, his voice soft but firm. "And now you see why they fear them. Books are dangerous in the hands of those who dare to think." Montag's eyes were wide with wonder and a hint of fear. "But what do we do with this knowledge? How do we share it when the whole world seems against us?" "We start small," Faber suggested, pulling out a tiny radio transmitter. "This is how we'll spread the word, one person at a time. You're not alone, Montag. There are others out there who are just waiting for a spark to ignite their minds." The fireman took the device, feeling its weight as if it was the key to a new world. "I'm ready," he said, determination replacing his earlier doubt. "Let's bring the fire of knowledge back to the people." Montag stood, a newfound strength in his posture, ready to embark on a path that would challenge the very foundations of his world. The rebellion begins. Montag sat in Faber's dimly lit parlor, surrounded by dusty books and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. The former professor's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief as he explained his plan to Montag. "We'll use this," Faber said, holding up a small green metal object. "A seashell radio. It's a marvel of technology. You'll be the drone, the traveling ear, and I'll be the queen bee, safe in the hive." Montag's eyes widened as he took the device from Faber. "What does it do?" "It allows you to listen in on the fireman's world, to analyze their weaknesses without danger. You'll be my eyes and ears, Montag. Together we'll gather information and find a way to expose them for what they are. Hotbeds of treason." Montag's heart raced with excitement and a touch of fear. He knew the risks were high, but he was willing to take them. What about the public? Won't they just ignore us? Faber's expression turned grave. That's the biggest challenge we face. The people have been conditioned to value entertainment and conformity over critical thinking. But we must try, Montag. We must try to awaken them. As Faber spoke, Montag felt a surge of determination. He thought of Clarice, of the books he had burned, and of the emptiness that had been growing inside him. "I'm ready, Faber," Montag said, his voice firm. Together, they pored over maps and plans, discussing strategies and tactics. Montag felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was no longer just a fireman, he was a rebel. As the night wore on, Montag and Faber made their way to the countryside, the seashell radio hidden in Montag's ear. They moved cautiously, avoiding detection by the authorities. Faber's voice brought him back to the present. "We'll need to be careful, Montag." Montag nodded. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Montag caught glimpses of the countryside, a world he had never known existed. The stars twinkled above, and the air was crisp and clean, untainted by the smoke and ash of the city. Confrontation with Beatty. Chapter 6. Confrontation with Beatty. The firehouse was alive with the crackling of flames and the heavy scent of kerosene. Montag stood rigid, his heart pounding against his chest. Beatty, with a sly grin, circled him. "Your play, Montag," he taunted, his voice smooth but edged. Montag's hands trembled as he recalled the weight of knowledge now tucked away. Beatty laughed. "Books are the enemy of happiness. Why think when you can be content?" Montag replied she wasn't afraid to question, to wonder. Beatty's eyebrow arched. That girl was a time bomb. The room seemed to close in on Montag, the walls whispering secrets. Mildred, his wife, flitted about, her laughter hollow, her eyes empty. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles sipped martinis, their chatter a shallow hum. Montag felt like an outsider, trapped in a world that was suffocating him. He glanced at Faber, who stood silently, his eyes fixed on Beatty with a mixture of disdain and warning. "You're wrong, Beatty," Montag said. "We're not happy, we're just numb." Beatty sneered. "You're just unhappy because you're not doing your job properly, Montag." The words sparked something within Montag. He remembered the thrill of saving the book. "I won't burn any more books, Beatty," he declared. Beatty's smile grew wider. "Oh, I think you will, Montag." Montag knew he had to make a choice. He could continue to live in a world that feared knowledge, or he could take a stand. Montag knew he had crossed a line. Montag knew he had to run. With a surge of resolve, he turned away from the fallen captain and the firehouse that had been his life. He didn't look back as he fled into the night, the book pressed against his side. The city loomed before him, a labyrinth of shadows and light, but Montag moved with purpose. He was no longer the fireman who burned books. He was now a guardian of the very thing he once destroyed. As he disappeared into the darkness, the firehouse behind him seemed to shrink, becoming nothing more than a speck in the vastness of his new world. The fugitive's escape. Montag's heart raced as he fled from the authorities. The dark, deserted streets echoed with the urgency of his footsteps. He thought of Clarice, her curious nature and inquisitive eyes that had once made him feel truly seen. As he ran, his mind was a whirlwind of rebellion and freedom, reflecting on the profound emptiness of the world he was leaving behind. The city loomed behind him, its countless doors slamming shut, a cacophony of rejection. He could feel the energy of the city rising, thousands of faces peering out from their homes, witnessing his flight. The smell of the river approached, cool and solid like rain, promising sanctuary. His throat burned, his eyes wept dry from the exertion, but he pushed forward, driven by a desperate need for liberation. Reaching the riverbank, Montag plunged into the comforting embrace of the water. The chaos of the city was replaced by the gentle lapping of the river against his skin. He floated, allowing the sense of peace and serenity to wash over him. The darkness of the water a stark contrast to the glaring city lights. Emerging from the river, Montag donned Faber's old clothes, symbolizing his transformation and rebirth. He continued his journey into the countryside, where the stars above twinkled with promise. The natural surroundings filled his senses. The scent of the land rich and earthy, the feel of leaves crunching beneath his feet, and the sounds of the wilderness a symphony of freedom. As he walked, Montag felt a deep connection to nature, filling up with the richness of the environment. The stars above guided him, their twinkling light illuminating his path. The railroad track materialized before him, a familiar path that seemed to lead him to his destiny. He walked along the tracks, feeling a sense of purpose and belonging. In the distance, a fire crackled, its warmth and smell drawing him in like an animal to the flames. Montag approached the fire, sensing the presence of others who shared his quest for knowledge and freedom. A group of men huddled around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They were intellectuals led by Granger, who valued knowledge and freedom above all else. Granger's eyes reflected the flames as he spoke, his voice low and soothing. "We've been waiting for you, Montag. We've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up for what's right, to carry the torch of knowledge in these dark times." Montag felt a sense of hope and belonging as he joined them, his hands reaching out to warm themselves by the fire. Each man had a story, a book they had committed to memory, a piece of the past they were determined to preserve. Montag felt a sense of determination as he looked up at the stars, ready to play his part in the revival of a world that had lost its way. The ashes of war. The city's once towering structures were now but shadows, their skeletal remains a stark testament to the war's fury. Amidst the ruins, Montag moved with purpose, his resolve hardened by the knowledge he bore. Granger and the others, a fellowship of silent custodians, walked alongside him, each a vessel of the world's lost wisdom. Where do we go from here? Montag's question, though soft, carried the weight of their shared destiny. Granger, his gaze fixed on the horizon, responded, "North, to the lands unscarred by man's folly, where nature's embrace can still mend the wounds of the world." Their journey through the city's remnants was a silent pilgrimage, each step a tribute to the memories they safeguarded. The transition from urban decay to the wild's embrace was gradual, the city's grip loosening with each mile until they stood at the threshold of the untamed. Here, they paused, the boundary between past and future laid bare before them. As dusk draped the sky, they settled at civilization's edge, where the wilderness began its reign. The fire they kindled was more than a beacon against the night. It was a symbol of their enduring spirit, a declaration that the light of knowledge would never be extinguished. Montag, seated by the fire, felt its warmth seep into him, a stark contrast to the chill that haunted his soul. His thoughts drifted to Clarice and Faber, their lives sacrificed to the flames he had once ignited with zealous fervor. No longer would he dwell on the past, for he carried within him the essence of the books he had read, not just words, but the very spirit of knowledge itself. He was a living testament to the power of literature, each memory a page in the grand book of human understanding. Granger's voice, steady and resolute, broke the reverie. "We've walked for days, turning our backs on the ashes of our past. But our journey is not one of escape. It is a march towards rebirth and renewal." Montag's heart stirred at Granger's words. He knew their mission extended beyond mere survival. They were the chosen few, entrusted with the sacred duty of safeguarding the flame of knowledge, ensuring it illuminated the path for generations to come. Each man among them was a guardian, a beacon in the night, carrying within himself the wisdom of the ages. As the night deepened, Montag's gaze remained fixed on the dancing flames, their flickering light a reflection of the hope that burned within him. In that moment, he envisioned a future where books were revered, where the pursuit of knowledge was unhindered, and humanity's dreams and aspirations knew no bounds. The fire's crackling song echoed the whispers of the poets, the philosophers and the visionaries whose words they carried. Montag's resolve strengthened with each passing moment. He knew that he and his companions were the keepers of the flame, the protectors of humanity's collective memory. Together they would forge a new beginning, planting the seeds of knowledge that would one day grow into a lush forest of wisdom. In the darkness of the night, Montag's spark of hope blazed, illuminating the path forward, leading them from the shadows of destruction into the light of tomorrow. The March of the Book Bearers. The morning air was crisp, and the sky was a canvas of soft blues and pinks as the group of book bearers, led by Granger, made their way through the wilderness. Montag walked among them, his mind a whirlwind of memories and verses from the books he had committed to heart. "Remember," Granger whispered, "the words we carry are more than just sounds. They're the essence of what makes us human." As they marched, the silence was punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of a bird. Montag thought of Clarice, her bright eyes and questioning spirit. She had opened his eyes to the beauty of questioning, of knowing. "Do you think we'll make it?" asked a young bearer beside Montag, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to," Montag replied, his voice firm. "For Clarice, for Faber, for all those who never had the chance to know." The group paused as a deer crossed their path, a momentary reminder of the life that persisted despite the world's chaos. Montag felt a surge of hope. They were the keepers of knowledge, the architects of a future where words would be free again. "And when we rebuild," he continued, "it will be a world filled with the wisdom of the past." The group moved on, the landscape around them slowly changing as they approached the outskirts of what was once a bustling city. The remnants of civilization began to emerge, with the rusting tracks leading back to the farms and barns, now silent witnesses to the past's hustle. The river, a ribbon of life amidst the desolation, flowed beside them, guiding their steps towards the clearing that awaited their arrival. As they emerged from the trees, the group beheld the clearing, where the river split, cradling the tree of life in its embrace. This majestic tree, with its roots deep and branches high, bore 12 kinds of fruits, each fruit ripening in its due month, and its leaves seemed to whisper promises of healing and unity. Montag stepped forward, his heart resonating with the symbolism of the tree. "Here, beneath the boughs of renewal, we lay down our burdens and begin the task of weaving a new tapestry of knowledge," he declared. The book bearers, inspired by the vision of a world reborn, shared their stories, each voice a thread in the fabric of a future written not with ink, but with the spirit of humanity. As the sun reached its zenith, Montag revealed his noontime revelation. "In the heart of this city we will plant the seeds of a new society, one where every voice is heard and every story is cherished." The chapter closed with the book bearers united in purpose. The Tree of Life. Montag, leading the way, felt the weight of their journey in his bones, but his spirit was buoyant with the promise of a new beginning. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine from the surrounding woods filled their lungs as they marched northward. "Remember this moment," Granger said, his voice steady and sure. "This is where we plant the seeds for the future." Montag nodded, his thoughts drifting to Clarice and Faber, the two beacons who had ignited the spark of change within him. He could almost hear Clarice's laughter in the rustling leaves, her curiosity as boundless as the sky above them. As they walked, they spoke of the books they carried within their minds, each recitation a whispered prayer for the world they left behind. Montag found himself reciting the verses of Ecclesiastes, the words a balm to his soul. "Granger," Montag asked, "do you think the world will listen to us?" Granger smiled, his eyes reflecting the hope that had brought them together. "They will in time. We are like the tree of life, Montag. We offer shelter and wisdom. And though the seasons may change, our roots run deep." They stopped by a stream to rest, the cool water soothing their parched throats and washing away the fatigue of their travels. Now the only flames he desired were those that cooked their simple meal and warmed their spirits. As they sat around the small fire, sharing stories and pieces of bacon, Montag felt a kinship with these strangers who had become his family. They were united by a common purpose, to remember and to rebuild. "Montag," a voice called out, and he turned to see a young man, no older than Clarice had been, looking at him with earnest eyes. "What was it like being a fireman?" Montag paused, the memories flooding back. It was like being blind, he finally said. I thought I saw everything, but I was only seeing the surface. It took losing everything to truly see. The young man nodded, absorbing his words. And now? He asked. Now, Montag replied, I see the possibility of a world where we can look beyond the surface, where we can grow and learn from the past. Like the tree of life, we can bear fruit from what seemed like barren ground. The group fell silent, each lost in their thoughts as the fire crackled before them. Montag looked up at the sky where the first stars of the evening were beginning to twinkle, and he felt a profound sense of peace. In this new world they were building, there was a place for everyone, a place where every voice could be heard, and every story told. The tree of life indeed was sprouting new branches.